I'll give a few moments for the front benches to swap over.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We now come to the backbench debate on the 5th anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic. I call Jay Masser to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I start by thanking the Honourable Member for Harrow East and the Backbench Business Committee for granting the request for this debate, and thank you too to all the Honourable Members who have supported the application. I approach the committee because it is important we mark the 5th anniversary since the pandemic. This was an extraordinary time in our lives and in our nation. In some ways, it feels like a dream. 5 years on, it seems hard to believe we actually went through such a period of disruption. But the impact has been huge and long-lasting, even if we do not acknowledge that on a day-to-day basis. I should say that I do not intend to talk about, nor do I hope this debate is about, the origins of the pandemic, the way it was handled, PPE, the then government, or any of the inquiries or legalities around it. There will be plenty of time for those discussions, and no doubt this House will have plenty of opportunities to talk about those things in future. I want this debate to be about people and about communities. We lost a lot of people to COVID, and the impact on those lost and who lost loved ones was significant. It cut across communities, across ages, and across faiths. Most of us will have had COVID. All of us will know someone who's been affected, and many of us will know people who have died, and understand the impact of grief, of loss, combined with the shock of a pandemic, the funerals unattended, and those that had to die alone. As the Prime Minister said at the time, people are frightened by the strangeness, anxious about what will happen next, and we have to remember that every number is a family shaken to its foundation. But it's not just those that we lost we must remember. The country kept going through the incredible hard work and bravery of our frontline workforce, but also through schools, community groups, places of worship, volunteers, and people being just good neighbours. Without them, we could have not kept going, and I know from my own experience in my community that the work of volunteers was vital in putting their community first, above and beyond their own needs. Likewise, our frontline workers, from the NHS and care homes to bin men and social workers, the emergency services and transport workers, just to name a few. There is a danger as we get into the politics and the legalities that we forget many workers on whom we quietly relied or allowed their contribution to be underappreciated. They deserve to be recognised and their efforts to be applauded. During the lockdowns, I was a member of the Newham Council Cabinet with responsibility for much of the public realm, including waste and recycling. I remember the posters being attached to the wheelie bins thanking the bin men for their work for coming out during the lockdown to clear rubbish. In normal times, we perhaps don't think about the people who collect our bins, other than to curse a little if it's an early morning collection, or mildly panic as you realise it's bin day and you haven't put them out. But in this time of stress, the role they played was emblematic of so many of our key workers, and it was great to see residents sharing their appreciation. Across Newham, over 650 residents volunteered their time with the Council's Help Newham initiative to support the borough's most vulnerable. There are also more than 500 COVID champions who helped distribute information and advice to their communities during the pandemic to keep people informed. Those are the people who made such a difference and provided vital support to the local council at a time when it was stretched delivering vital services in a borough with a high number of vulnerable people and a high rate of infection and casualties. We often talk about the numbers. It's important we understand the sheer scale of the impact the pandemic had on our communities. My borough lost over 1,000 people to COVID, one of the worst hit places in the country, and at the beginning of the pandemic, it was the worst affected place in the UK. It's extremely easy to lose sight of the impact when we're talking about numbers, and the larger the number, the greater the danger is it becomes a statistic, and the individuals behind it are lost. But behind those numbers are real people, real stories, real lives. We must never forget that. Backed up with stories of compassion and kindness from families and friends and from NHS doctors and nurses. And it is vital we find ways for their names and faces to be remembered and their families to gain comfort from that memory. Madam Deputy Speaker, the inspiration from this debate came from my staff during a visit to Plaistow Park. It is there that Newham has created its permanent memorial to COVID. In the middle of the crisis, I was certain that we would need to find a way to mark this for local people. It was clear from the scale of the pandemic and the lives lost that there would be a national and regional memorials. Indeed, Newham hosts the London Blossom Garden and Memorial for London in the Olympic Park, in the constituency of my neighbour and honourable friend, the member for Stratford and Bow. And the National Memorial Wall has offered much to many people. But given the impact in Newham, we needed something dedicated to our local people. A monolithic memorial felt wrong. This was not a war memorial. This needed to be something that reflected the nature of who was impacted. It needed to be a memorial for all, young or old, single or with a family, religious or not. It had to be a space for everyone. And what was designed was a memorial garden in one of our parks, created with the help of our parks team, landscape architects and local artist Matt Ponting, and importantly in consultation and discussion with local people, and designed to work for all in our community. A landscaped area in a previously little used area of Plaistow Park in my constituency, in the centre of our borough, with trees and flowers, seating, its own paths and works of art, in which you can sit quietly, or pray, or reflect, or enjoy with others. On the day of its opening in 2023, over 100 local people turned out. It included one local resident who had lost his father. Still grieving the loss, his appreciation of having a place that he could visit, and that meant that his father and those who died had not been forgotten, is something that struck me, and something I remember vividly. Madam Deputy Speaker, all politicians hope they have a legacy. We all have ideas of what we might like to achieve. I did when I started as a councillor, and I even achieved some of them. But if I had to leave just one thing behind me, I think it would be that garden. Sadly, there is no database of memorials or an online guide as to what has been put in place. Yet we will all know of something that has been done to recognise the impact of COVID. We need to create some form of guide or register so we can ensure these memorials are not lost for the future. And we know the good work has been done. Researching some of the background to this debate, I came across some wonderful examples, such as memorial gardens in Telford and Oldham and Enfield, memorial woodlands in Wokingham and Hornchurch, and a memorial mosaic in Barrow. Hopefully we'll hear more examples from honourable members this afternoon. These spaces are vital, not just for now, but for the generations that come after us. We cannot allow the legacy of the pandemic to be the preserve of documentaries, textbooks and history lessons. It should be a legacy rooted in our communities, celebrating the sacrifices and contributions that were made and remembering those who are no longer with us, not as the statistics they are recorded by, but by the lives they lived. Madam Deputy Speaker, this year is the 85th anniversary of the beginning of the Blitz, which started in my constituency. And it was in the East End of London that the phrase we still use, Blitz spirit, emerged. Spirit of standing firm and working together as a community. We saw in 2020 how strongly that still existed, and when the chips were down, the strength of our communities. Perhaps we should now be talking about pandemic spirit, and talking with pride about how that spirit shone through across our communities. Today, I hope in this house we can contribute to this. I hope this debate will provide comfort for those remembering loved ones. I hope it helps ensure that all of those who went out to work to keep things going and those difficult days get their recognition. And I hope it helps shine a light on the army of volunteers who stepped up and helped when it was needed most.
Yeah. The question is, as on the order paper, and colleagues can see how many members wish to contribute. So there is a speaking limit of 3 minutes, and I come to Wendy Chamberlain first.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for West Ham and Beckton for securing this debate, but also the eloquent and passionate way in which he spoke. And I agree with him, it has been hard preparing for this debate because in many ways I think we have still to come to terms with what has happened. And for myself it was particularly strange as a new MP, as I was at the start of 2020, and I arrived in this place after recent years for everything to be seen, debated and understood through the lens of Brexit, because that is how it had been up until that point. But then just 3 months later, after my election, we saw COVID and national lockdowns, and they changed absolutely everything. I recruited staff and handed them laptops and didn't know when I would see and engage with them again. And I do think that this place was diminished too, because the benefit of developing those cross-party relationships is so valuable, and you don't realise what it is until you don't have the opportunity to have it. And in the same way as the Honourable Member has thanked those in his community, I would recognise the staff here who did so much to facilitate the sitting of this House and the work that needed to be done. And every day as I come in here, Madam Deputy Speaker, I walk past the National COVID Memorial, and on a couple of occasions I've seen people there updating or enhancing some of the fading that has happened. And I think it's important that we do. It is a memorial that is across from this place, and we take that moment to remember the 200,000 plus people who died from COVID-19 in the UK. It is a daily poignant remembrance and reminder of the cruel, devastating and terrifying disease that COVID was, especially in those early months. And for those affected, the pain of that loss is still acute. I do want to touch on one thing as a Scottish MP, Madam Deputy Speaker. Policy responses to the pandemic highlighted that often we don't have four-nation thinking and decision-making. And in those early days, of course, everything was aligned and we saw the strength of intergovernmental thinking and decisions. And as hard as it was, there was one set of rules and they applied everywhere. But there's no doubt that as time went on, the rules got more complex. Inside, outside work, 2 metres, rule of 6 tiers, and they did differ between the four nations. I myself had to have both a COVID app for Scotland and for England, and occasionally got pinged in different places by different apps. And I just wanted to bring one example from my constituency. I should declare an interest as the MP for North East Fife, was the impact on golf and tourism, and those different rules did have an impact on that too. And so I think, you know, the lesson, or as I bring my remarks to a close, is I think that we do need to learn those lessons. I'm pleased to see that there is better intergovernmental working between the Scottish and UK governments, but we always need to ensure that where we have different policy responses, that they are good, that they are clear, and they are for the right reasons. Thank you.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend the member for West Ham and Beckton for bringing this debate today. The COVID-19 pandemic had a universal global reach. However, the impact was not felt equally. On a local level, the pandemic had a disproportionate impact on some of the most vulnerable in society. The elderly, those with pre-existing conditions, and people living in the most deprived areas saw some of the highest fatality rates. The COVID-19 pandemic here in the UK and globally displayed for all to see, or all who cared to see, the damning consequences of societal and economic inequalities. Globally, COVID-19 is estimated to have directly caused 7 million deaths, and indirectly many millions more. The global response was unequal and unjust, with many countries being starved of essential vaccines, tests and treatments. Though some spoke of COVID-19 as being a once-in-a-lifetime event, this is not necessarily true. A key way of honouring those who died, those who were left bereaved, those who suffered in so many ways, is to focus on having a plan for the next pandemic. Studies suggest that outbreaks caused by diseases moving from animals to people are happening more often and with greater impact. That said, there are reasons for hope in this area. A number of initiatives and projects are working to ensure the next outbreak does not catch us unprepared. One example is the 100 Days Mission. This is a global initiative that aims to have safe, effective and accessible vaccines, tests and treatments within 100 days of the next pandemic. It is estimated the world deployed vaccines, tests and treatments if it had within 100 days for COVID, rather than 300 days, we could have prevented 8.3 million excess deaths and avoided trillions in economic losses. It is welcome that the UK government continues to support this mission and more general global health research and development. Research in this area, and in so many others, is so important. We live in an age where some decry experts. I would suggest we need more expertise, more research and more science, not less. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would make the point that we do need to remember those who suffered and those who died, and we need to mark that by a commitment to ensure that we are better placed than ever before for any such eventuality in the future.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for West Ham and Beckton for securing this debate, which is taking place 5 years after COVID-19 swept across the country. So it's quite right that we take a moment to reflect not only on what we've lost, but also on the duty that we have to those who continue to carry the burden of this pandemic. Because I'm speaking today for some of the families who caught COVID and never recovered. For them, the pandemic is not just history, a chapter from their past. It is still very much with them today. And I'm speaking in particular for those in my constituency who did the right thing, followed the rules, took the vaccine and were harmed. In particular, I want to share the story of Adam Bounds, who came from Axminster. He was 41 years old, a devoted father, a hard-working man and deeply loved by his family. On the 20th of May 2021, he received his first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and 11 days later, he died of vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, a very rare but now medically recognised side effect, essentially blood clots. My constituent, Adam's father, Leslie, has fought a very dignified and determined campaign to get compensation for Leslie's grandson, that is Adam's son, through the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. It has taken 2 years and considerable stress and anxiety. The family have now received the £120,000 payment, and Leslie has dealt with it all, causing him an enormous amount of trauma, frankly. 2 years of form filling, chasing departments, and reliving that awful historic period. If we want people to have faith in vaccines, and I do, then we must ensure that we have a proper functioning compensation system, a system that is swift, supportive and responsive to the needs of grieving families. Justice isn't only about those who died, it's also about those who are living with the aftershocks. In Devon, there are 20,000 people who are reported to have long COVID. I will.
Victoria Collins.
He speaks passionately about something that's also an issue in my constituency, and I have residents who come forward with that. Also, Anna in Harpenden, 12-year-old living with long COVID, headaches, stomach issues day in, day out. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that we need to have a COVID register and care pathway to make sure that those who are living with the consequences of COVID are looked after properly?
Richard Ford.
Well, she's absolutely right. A COVID register would make very good sense. And I mean, the honourable member for Harpenden mentioned the symptoms including tiredness. They also include struggling for breath, memory problems and heart palpitations. And let's remember that many of those people who are now affected by long COVID are the very people who took the brave decision to expose themselves right at the beginning. People who we would pay tribute to, such as care workers, shop assistants, health staff, teachers, those who kept society going while others were isolating. Last month, I was speaking with residents in Sidmouth, and I met a constituent who shared the impact that long COVID is continuing to have on his daughter. She was somebody who was hardworking and determined, but now finds that her energy has almost vanished. She's unable to work, she's often confined to her bed, and her social life has disappeared. Like thousands of others across the UK, she's facing the potential hammer blow of the government's proposed welfare reforms. Most people with fluctuating invisible conditions like long COVID or ME aren't going to be eligible, as we understand, for PIP under the new assessment. And according to the ONS, 3.6% of adults say they have experienced long COVID at some point. If we want a society that is prepared for the next crisis, we must learn the lessons of the last one. We owe it to Leslie Bounds, to others in Sidmouth, and to everyone across the country who suffered from COVID. Thank you.
Dr. Jeevan Sundar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you to the member for West Ham for bringing forward this debate. We've spoken rightfully about those who died during COVID, but COVID also did something else. It made it much harder for people to earn a decent living. Those who were already struggling, the low-paid, the young, and those places outside of London suffered the most. Firstly, COVID hit the low-paid. Low-paid people who did jobs like bartending that could only be done in person because they require complex manual movements, and the high-paid jobs that people could do while zooming in and out of the office. It was the low-paid who were hit, far more likely to be laid off, far more likely to be placed on furlough. Secondly, The young fell behind while the wealthy baby boomers continued to pull ahead. The 2 decades leading up to COVID, we saw house prices go up by 100% while wages only grew by 20%. That's why the young cannot afford homes. And then during the pandemic, quantitative easing, low interest rates, pensioners not spending cash, it meant baby boomers started to buy homes again. House prices up by 25% since COVID began, while 40% of 18 to 34-year-olds are still living at home with mum and dad. And thirdly, London continuing to pull ahead, zooming to work, largening its effective size, while those places outside the capital lose out. More and more people and economic activity sucked into the capital. And what we find is those people who already could not make ends meet, pulling away from not only mainstream parties, but pulling away from this house itself. The economically insecure, 50% more likely to have left us in the Labour Party, and they're also leaving, frankly, almost every party in this house. Now, we can reshape our nation so everyone can earn enough, but can we do that if government acts? For the low-paid, investing to create good jobs, investing to get bills down. For the young, building far more homes. And for the rest of the nation, investing outside of London. We are at this moment a nation deeply divided, and the pandemic widened those divisions. Those who already... I'll give way.
Thousands of self-employed people and business owners were excluded from government support, be it by arbitrary eligibility criteria. They paid their taxes but were left unsupported in the crisis. Does the honourable member agree that it's disappointing that 5 years on these people are still struggling?
Dr. Jimson.
I thank the member very much for their intervention, and indeed, look, huge amounts of people being hit so hard during the pandemic, and I think we agree while the support was broad, it certainly was not perfect. And on top of that, of course, a pandemic that did indeed make it difficult, people who suffered during it, but widened the inequalities that were already in place. It widened the divisions in our nation. It was those who could not earn enough. It was the low paid, it was the young, and it was everywhere that is not London that was hit the hardest. They were already turning away from us in this house. They are now turning away more quickly. And we can bring them back. We can only bring them back if we act to make sure that every single person can earn enough for a decent life. A nation where we recognise that our strength is founded in each of us doing well. A nation with unity, with common purpose and connection. It is for us to build that nation, as the member for West Ham rightfully noted. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for West Ham and Beckton for bringing this debate today, and in particular the tribute he made to our public service workers. And we should never forget that in places like Edinburgh, everyone from bus drivers to bin drivers took huge risks at the start of the pandemic because the consequences and the transmission of the virus was unknown. And I have to, at this point, Madam Deputy Speaker, mention my lovely wife because she worked in end-of-life care as a nurse all the way through, and also the fantastic Hannah in my office who worked in a care home. But COVID has not disappeared. The fantastic COVID memorial wall across from this building tells us that the number of hearts on it is slowly growing, and I do hope when the Minister responds, she can give us an update on any plans to make that permanent and mark the fantastic work of the Friends of the Wall. In Scotland last year, so COVID isn't away yet, in Scotland last year, in 1 week alone, 443 people were hospitalised with COVID. And long COVID is now more prevalent, or just as prevalent, as strokes, COPD, and atrial fibrillation.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for bringing up Long COVID, an organisation that is Long COVID Kids, which was founded by my constituent Sammy McFarland, highlights the experience that particularly young people are facing with Long COVID. Does he share with me that we need to make sure we give it the consideration it needs alongside other illnesses when we develop health policy going forwards, even though we are some 5 years on from the...
Dr. Scotland.
Absolutely, and hopefully within the time limit I'm going to expand on that a little tiny bit, but that organisation sounds absolutely fantastic, so thank you for mentioning them. One of the most powerful things about being an MP, of course, is the people we meet, particularly in our constituency. And one of those people is Sophie, who attended my surgery in the fantastic Fountainbridge Library. And her story starkly portrays the reality of living with long COVID. Sophie enjoyed a full and active life before the pandemic. She used to run to her office in the mornings, where she oversaw a small team of dedicated designers. I'm sure she wasn't too sweaty at that point after her run to work. Now she relies on a wheelchair to get around and is largely housebound. In her own words, she said, "I am desperate to get back to my career and my life again, and to live life in its fullness, but doctors have been unable to help her." Sophie is just one of a small but growing number of constituents who write to me with stories which highlight the seemingly irreversible impact that COVID infection has had on their lives. With no proven treatments or cure in sight, we can't afford to treat COVID as old news. We need to keep talking about it, in particular with those people who are suffering from long COVID. And it shouldn't be an economic argument, but the impact of long COVID to our economy is significant. It's estimated to cost us £4.2 billion up to 2030. So as long as treatment options remain limited and new patients continue to join the thousands already grappling with long COVID on a daily basis, we need to do just three things to help them and help reduce the burden on our NHS. We need to empathise with those who have this condition and treat it seriously. I think too often they're seen as working the system, and I know through the people I've met that is completely untrue. We need to invest in new trials and research. And we have to recognise that while the threat of COVID may still be around, we have to take it seriously and make sure vulnerable groups are vaccinated. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by declaring my interest in this debate as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on vulnerable groups to pandemics. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. It's almost surreal 5 years on to see those words aloud today. Most of us had never heard of social distancing or imagined a Britain under lockdown. Overnight, vibrant communities turned still. Our high streets, once filled with life and laughter, became eerily silent, like scenes from a Hollywood sci-fi. But this wasn't fiction, it was our shared reality. The consequences were real, the sacrifices immeasurable. And today, as we reflect on that time, we carry a duty not just to remember, but to learn the lessons for the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many of us, the COVID pandemic feels like a closed chapter. The lockdowns have ended, the pubs are open, the masks are off, and life has almost returned to normal. But for over 1 million people across the UK, normal never really returned, because those people are those who are immunocompromised. They can't mount an effective response to mRNA vaccines. The very tool that pulled so many of us out of lockdown, the vaccine, simply doesn't work for them. That means today, in 2025, they're still living with the same risk that the elderly and clinically vulnerable faced in those terrifying months in 2020. They're still shielding, they're still isolated, still left behind, and the toll on those people and their families is appalling. A recent report by the campaign group Forgotten Lives found that 93% of family members of immunocompromised patients are still shielding to protect their loved ones. 3/4 of those families are in the clinical range for anxiety and depression. Half of all patients are missing medical appointments, and 1/3 are facing financial hardship. I know the Secretary of State has previously met with immunocompromised patients and representatives from the Forgotten Lives UK group. I welcome that engagement and support their call to action for better support. However, I must express my disappointment. As the chair of the APPG for Vulnerable Groups to Pandemics, I wrote to both the previous minister and the current minister requesting a meeting with myself and those immunocompromised patients, but today have not received a response. I'd be grateful if the minister could follow up on that matter directly. And to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, flicking through my well-prepared speech, we need a whole government approach to addressing this and tangible assistance to help people reintegrate into work and public life and educate society about the ongoing risks of COVID-19 that it continues to pose to immunocompromised individuals.
We're not going to get everybody in unless I drop the speaking limit again down to 2 minutes. And Maya Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations my friend for securing this debate to learn from the COVID years. I'd like to pay tribute first to the amazing health workers, volunteers and key workers who did support us through this very turbulent time, and I'll focus my brief contribution on the often overlooked impact that COVID had on maternity services, pregnancy and the lived experiences of women. We know that women were shut out of the highest levels of decision making during the pandemic, and so their voices were sidelined. Research from the London School of Economics found that the Conservative government consistently failed to consider gender in its response to COVID-19. During COVID, the Maternal Mental Health Alliance reported a sharp rise in maternal anxiety, and the already concerning gaps in the perinatal mental health services widened further. Informal support networks so vital to new mothers were decimated by lockdowns and restrictions. The withdrawal of home birth services and the closure of midwife-led units during the pandemic curtailed women's autonomy in choosing how and where to give birth. This shift saw many forced to deliver in hospital environments where COVID-19 was actively being treated, heightening the health risks for both mothers and their newborns. Postnatal services also suffered immensely. A coalition of 13 pregnancy and baby charities gave evidence to COVID-19 and spoke of how the needs of mothers and new parents were consistently overlooked in critical health decisions, which included one-year assessments being done over video call, lack of replacements for in-person baby classes, and no health visitors or community. Very limited for time, so in conclusion, can I just remind the House that roughly 1.85 million babies were born during the UK pandemic years, and that all these children have mothers who had to face this time alone, confused and forgotten. We owe it to every parent, every midwife and every newborn to ensure that this never happens again. Let this be our legacy, not just remembrance but resolve. Resolve to build a health system that is resilient, compassionate and prepared, because the next generation deserves to be welcomed into a world that has learned from its past and strives for better. Thank you.
Phil Brickell. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to congratulate my friend, the member for West Ham and Beckton, for securing this debate. Now, it may be 5 years since the pandemic began, but those years cast a long shadow, and regrettably, the effects will be felt for many, many years to come. Across my constituency, in and around Bolton, the pandemic left a deep scar with thousands of lives tragically cut short. These weren't numbers on a board or figures on a screen. They were neighbours, parents, siblings, children, mums and dads, aunts and uncles, family, friends and loved ones. Their memory must be honoured, not just in fine words in this chamber today, but in our commitment to learning the lessons from the COVID pandemic, so that never again do we find ourselves wholly unprepared for a public health emergency. And we would be doing all those people who lost or risked their lives a huge disservice if we didn't learn the lessons of the pandemic. So I would implore the Minister today, and I hope we will be able to make progress on this, in looking at how it was possible that our frontline workers were sent into battle against the virus without adequate PPE provision. PPE which was deemed unfit for purpose, PPE which was not delivered in a timely manner, PPE which was not manufactured to NHS requirements, and PPE contracts which were awarded by the previous government, which saw millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money squandered by, frankly, a cavalier approachment to procurement, which raised serious questions about integrity, around probity, around value for money, and which 5 years after COVID first hit these shores continue to wind their way through our courts. Of course, the government needed to act at speed at that time. Nobody denies that. But what went on is, in my view, inexcusable. And leading anti-corruption charity Transparency International UK produced a 2024 report titled Behind the Mask, which found a total of 135 high-risk COVID-19 contracts totalling £15.3 billion, many of which were awarded without competitive tender, were rushed and were... Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, up to 1,400 people died because of COVID. Many in my constituency are living with grief, trauma and long COVID. When I speak with GPs, they rightly are pleased and proud about their role in vaccinating our town and our country, but they feel that this role has been forgotten. Would he agree with me that we need to remember the contribution of our GPs as vaccinators and send a signal from this House that we thank them?
I welcome the contribution from my honourable friend. It's not just GPs, it's all the key workers who were so vital in making sure that our country could keep going and kept us safe during those terrible years. Going back to the point around government procurement, we know that the VIP lane that was in place disproportionately favoured companies with political connections rather than capability or value for money to deliver. Indeed, the National Audit Office found that suppliers on the VIP list were 10 times more likely to secure a PPE contract from the government than those that came through the ordinary lane. Now, this would all be well and good if those contracts provided any sort of value for money, and the Good Law Project revealed that such contracts were 80% more expensive than other suppliers. Indeed, some contracts were agreed at more than 4 times the average unit price. I will close with this. In order to truly honour the legacy of those who tragically lost their lives in their hundreds of thousands during the pandemic, we must act on the lessons learned during those awful few years. We must ensure there's a proper government procurement system in place which can secure the public's trust. And what...
Good morning.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Members have mentioned the memorial wall on the banks of the Thames opposite this place, on which 240,000 hearts denote individuals we lost during COVID-19. I want to just mention one of those individuals, and that's my granddad, Bill. We lost him in June 2020, 5 years ago next week. He'd gone into hospital with something else, but he'd contracted COVID on the ward, and he passed away. And he died on his own in a hospital bed. None of us were allowed to see him because we were following the rules. And the next time I saw him, he was in a coffin in an empty church. And the reason I remember that date in June 2020 so viscerally is not only because we lost him in a way that was impossible to properly grieve, but also because on the very same day, the Prime Minister at the time had a birthday party in Number 10. I think there are many people across this House and across this country who will have stories like that while we followed the rules and made sacrifices and lost people, they acted with impunity. I don't want to make this party political, because I know there'll be members in the opposite party who will also feel angry about that too. But I hope that as we mark this anniversary, all of us commit ourselves to making sure that that bond of trust between politicians and the public is rebuilt and is never again frayed and broken in that way so fundamentally. In the remaining seconds I have, I just want to pay tribute to all of our key workers, everyone in our NHS and all of our communities, particularly those in Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland who came together during that pandemic, as we always have in times of hardship, in a way that we have never seen before. Thank you.
Frank McNally.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the time I have today, I want to focus on education and care provision throughout the pandemic. I was serving as North Lanarkshire's Chair of Education when the Scottish Government directed the closure of schools in March 2020. Within days, the entire country was locked down. We moved to homeschooling and virtual lessons.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Of course, absolutely.
Does my honourable friend share my concern for the children in all our constituencies who, after losing nearly 2 years of face-to-face schooling, are still suffering setbacks in their learning and in their social skills? And would he join me in calling on the Government to channel investment into those who were at school during those years of disruption to ensure that there is not a lost generation in this country?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right. And I think we are seeing the UK Government invest significantly in skills and apprenticeships for some of those young people who were impacted by the pandemic, and we need to see that in Scotland as well. But my honourable friend's right, we saw and experienced a complete alternate universe, it felt like, for children transitioning from early years into primary 1 and from primary 7 to secondary, social distancing, the expansion of digital and PPE. Sadly, despite the best efforts of those on the front line, young people did endure lost learning, which we have to tackle head on. But they did show a resilience, and sadly that resilience and those efforts were trampled on when the Scottish Government sought to downgrade the higher results of 2,900 children from my local authority area. That represented 46% of young people who were discriminated against based on their postcode rather than recognised for their ability, and thankfully young people successfully fought back on that one. I also want to touch on the role of carers. Like so many frontline workers, they showed up. They put their health and well-being on the line to serve some of the most vulnerable in our communities. They did so against a backdrop of at times limited and faulty PPE, entrenched low pay and poor policy decisions that saw frail patients discharged from hospitals into care homes untested, contributing to 5,000 care home deaths. There can often be a focus on Downing Street parties or deleted WhatsApp messages, but at the forefront of our minds must always be the victims of COVID, including those who died unnecessarily and those who live, as my honourable friend said, with long COVID and the psychological impact of the disease. But also those who delivered that ultimate act of service, from refuge collectors to police officers, nurses, to shop workers and to many others from the voluntary sector and religious establishments. As we recognise this 5th anniversary of COVID, their efforts in the face of such hardship, their resilience and their sacrifice must be the true and lasting legacy of such an unprecedented pandemic that we must all fight to ensure we never experience again.
Yeah. MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to follow on from my honourable friends member South West and for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. I've been meeting with a group of clinicians that approached me. They've been led by Dr. Ray Duncan. She's the consultant cardiologist and long COVID physician and researcher at Newcastle Hospital. She provided me a detailed briefing note, and in 2 minutes it wouldn't allow me to give any justice to it, so I'll circulate it to honourable members. But the message is very, very straightforward, which is they want to get across, the team want to get across the message that COVID's not over, it's not seasonal, and it's not just a cold. They want to get across that this is a long-term burden and it's substantial and it's chronic.
On that point, the Honourable give way.
Certainly.
I thank the Honourable for giving way, and I'll be very brief. This week is Diabetes Week, so we'd rightly look at the impact diabetes would have uniquely on children, regardless to the wider population. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that a similar approach must be taken for long COVID and the unique impact it has on children and young people, so we can better understand it?
John MacDonald, I think the honourable member needs to respond to the first intervention. He may wish to. I appreciate what's happening. He may wish to take the second intervention shortly. John MacDonald.
I've never seen a give way on a give way. But I want to follow on from that point if I can. What the clinicians are trying to get across to me is exactly what others have said, really, that the doubles the risk of heart attack. We've seen heart attack, strokes, pulmonary emboly, deep vein thrombosis, and in addition to that, it's trying to get across the message. It is not simply fatigue. It is an umbrella of a range of chronic multi-system pathologies that has an effect. And one of the issues that it crosses, and it affects children in particular, is the work of Dr. Daniel Beckman has shown that the COVID breaches the blood-brain barrier, and as a result of that, it infects the neurons, causes persistent brain inflammation, and therefore it imposes cognitive impediments as well.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. My friend agreed with me that during COVID, the pandemic, and you spoke about children, it really affected children who were going through school, and all of a sudden they couldn't see their friends for many, many, many weeks. And it really struck me. I worked in the NHS, and when you're living in the moment, you don't think of these things, but when you reflect, you think, oh God, what a time we lived through. And it struck me when my niece was running through the park and she saw her friend, and she was 10 years old, and they ran and they hugged. It was fantastic to see because they hadn't seen each other for so long. And that act of kindness, friendship, coming together, spirit, really lifted me, because even children at that age were feeling something so huge, something that we'd never felt before. And for that was just an inspirational point in my time during COVID, and it helped me through my NHS, you know.
Yeah. The intervention on an intervention was definitely worth it. I want to raise this issue very briefly. One of the messages they wanted me to get across is exactly that children have not been spared on this. What they're saying is just some of the research that they've done, for example, doubles the risk of cardiovascular disease, and it doubles the risk of diabetes in children as well. We've just seen a recent study in America, which is actually looking at maybe up to 20% of children at the moment are actually endangered and experiencing long COVID symptoms themselves. One of the other issues that came out of the discussions I was having with the clinicians is that repeat infections are cumulatively dangerous. And as a result of that, the long COVID increases the cardiovascular, neurological, gastrointestinal and endocrine diseases. It's trying to get across how challenging this is at the moment. The problem we have at the moment is the ONS COVID infection survey has been shut down now. I can understand the argument at the time, but the recent GP survey that was undertaken, the figures that came out of that was 3.2 million of actually experiencing long COVID at the moment. Again, staggering figures. So a number of recommendations have come forward for the conditions. One is to restore national infection surveillance as quickly as possible. Exactly as my honourable friend has said, fund research and clinical services for long COVID, implement public health mitigations to reduce infection, particularly in places like hospitals, classrooms, etc., air circulation. We benefit from it in this building, others should as well. And exactly as my honourable friend said, protect vulnerable populations, including children, from chronic disability that this could impose. I'll circulate the briefing paper to all members and we can have another discussion at another time. I was hoping no one would turn up today and I'd have a long debate.
I come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tessa Munt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today we mark 5 years since the start of COVID-19 pandemic. Just under 227,000 people in the UK died with COVID-19 listed as a cause on their death certificate. Every one of those statistics is a mother, a father, brother, sister, a child, neighbour or friends. Thousands were separated from loved ones, and that loss and grief may never fully heal. And yet, in the darkest of times, the British people shone with immense compassion, courage and a sense of community spirit. Doctors, nurses and carers worked punishing hours, often risking their own lives. Teachers and council workers and others worked in the toughest of conditions. Volunteers came forward in droves to collect and deliver prescriptions, shop for the frail and elderly, staff temporary centres to administer vaccines and check in on neighbours. That resilience and solidarity showed the very best of who we are. Sadly, that same spirit of public service was not reflected in the highest offices of government. The findings from the first COVID inquiry, led by Baroness Hallett, laid bare the truth. The UK was ill-prepared for dealing with the catastrophic emergency, let alone the coronavirus pandemic. We'd planned for the wrong pandemic, one based on flu. We ignored the risks associated with other potential pathogens. We ignored warnings, and then we failed to act on lessons from past civil emergency exercises and outbreaks of disease. These were systemic and political failings which worsened people's suffering. Let's be frank, the most vulnerable paid the highest price. There was cruelty in the rigidity of restrictions, where families were kept apart even in their loved ones' final moments. All of this was made more painful by the bitter hypocrisy of Partygate, a betrayal of trust that mocked the sacrifices of millions. The Lib Dems called for this inquiry in 2020 and we continue to demand answers. The full facts must be known about every aspect of the government's poor response, not born out of a desire for vengeance, but for the British people deserve to know the truth, and they deserve far, far better in future. We now have a moral responsibility to act, and this government must commit to implementing the inquiry's recommendations in full and without delay. Patients and care home residents must have a legal right to maintain contact with their loved ones. A comprehensive civil emergency strategy is essential. The new UK Resilience Academy must train 4,000 people in resilience and emergency roles as promised. Can the Minister give us confidence that this will be delivered? The voices of frail and older people must be heard at the heart of government planning. We call for a Commissioner for Ageing and Older People to ensure their needs are never neglected again. Public officials must be held to a duty of candour. The government's promise of a Hillsborough law remains unfulfilled. Can the Minister say when survivors and families will see the legislation for which they've waited so long? We must confront also a hard truth. Our nation was less resilient because health inequality has left our population, quite simply, less healthy. Years of cuts to public health services under the Conservatives left us more vulnerable. So the Lib Dems are calling for urgent action, increasing the public health grant and allowing communities to co-produce plans, establish a health creation unit to lead cross-government efforts to improve health and well-being and tackle inequality, improve access to blood pressure checks in community spaces and expand social prescribing, introduce a new framework for health apps and digital health tools, ensuring they're clinically sound, and creating a new levy on tobacco company profits to fund healthcare and smoking cessation services, and to pass a Clean Air Act to tackle pollution and improve air quality. Lastly, we must not forget those living with consequences of the virus, and the Honourable Gentleman agreed. So we call for a long COVID register. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we remember those who lost, we owe it to them and to future generations to ensure these lessons are not buried in reports and left on shelves, but lead to real changes which make improvements in our constituents' lives. The British people were courageous, generous and selfless. They deserve a government that acts to match that spirit. Thank you.
Shadow House Secretary of State Ed Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman both on his speech and on securing this important debate. And I think we've seen today the vast majority of contributions have been measured, thoughtful, non-political, and I think have done this House proud. It is right we remember, reflect and learn, and that I think is the least we owe those who lost loved ones during the pandemic. As someone who, during the pandemic, was doing the job of the Honourable Lady, the Minister, opposite, I recall it incredibly well, as will so many in this House and outside of this House. The Honourable Gentleman, I think, said, and I know what he means, saying that with the passage of 5 years, sometimes it can feel a little bit like a dream. What happened then? Well, as I suspect it is, for many, it is something that still catches me and mine at night, often waking with a jolt, suddenly remembering vividly something that took place then, or something we did or had to do then, or a particular moment as a minister. And I suspect that is true of many up and down this country in many different walks of life, including particularly those who are on the front line. I will very briefly.
Way, I just want to emphasise my wife was an obs and gynae doctor, she still is. She was one of those people on the front line who he describes there. Would he agree with me that there needs to be a study into the long-term impact on the well-being of staff that were on the front line dealing with these very traumatic situations to understand both their health impacts but also productivity within the NHS?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I do think that's important because there are people up and down this country who still live with the impacts of that pandemic, with long COVID, with mental health challenges. And we saw that huge impact on individuals and, of course, still today on the NHS itself. We must remember how the country came together in the face of unprecedented events about which we learnt more every day and had to adapt our approach to that changing knowledge. And I'm grateful to all across both sides of this chamber for what they did. Well, there's a few members in this House who were in this House at the time will remember. I particularly recognise the work of John Ashworth, who was in this place at that time for his cross-party approach to so much that was done. I pay tribute to emergency services, to counsellors, to the people of this country, particularly to those who worked in health and social care and those who have lost someone. It was a traumatic time for the whole country. There are lessons that must be learnt about planning for future pandemics, about supporting those with long COVID, and the Honourable Gentleman was right. Like so many, I have constituents who lost family, who were affected by the vaccine, recognised by a coroner, and lost a loved one. They've been dignified and courteous, but they call for the government to review the vaccine damage payment scheme, and I hope the Minister will take that suggestion in the spirit in which it's intended. We owe this country to make sure that we are better prepared for any future pandemic. We owe it to those who lost loved ones or who suffered in so many different ways in terms of long COVID, in terms of their mental health, kids who are unable to attend school, domestic abuse sufferers, and those who still suffer today. It's right we remember, reflect and debate as we do now in order to learn. I know, as a former health minister, there are memories of that, as so many will have, that will continue to surface and that we will live with, all of us, till the end of our days. The least we can do is to ensure that this House And this country always remembers and reflects very carefully on what we can do better next time.
Smith, Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. And in the time, I think I'm short of time now, but my honourable friend has, from Barnsley South, who leads on this, has hot-footed it from committee, and I know will take up any actions that I don't get to from what has been a really moving debate. I would like to thank my honourable friend member of West Ham and Beckton for securing the debate. Clearly, it is popular debate to bring a lot of issues in this House, and he says we have to remember the people in the communities behind the numbers and the stats. And my thoughts and the thoughts of everyone are with the families and community who lost loved ones because of the pandemic. We've heard the magnitude of that grief expressed today, the pain of families unable to be with their loved ones in the normal rituals of grief and bereavement, as outlined by my friend from Middlesbrough South and East Clevedon about the loss of his grandfather. The member for Oniton and Sidmouth talked about the loss of Adam, and we understand those battles with the compensation payments. My friend from Ribble Valley talked about the women undergoing pregnancies and birth. And can I pay tribute to my friend, the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, for the work that she's doing in the APPG, and I will absolutely make sure that she gets a response to her letter. It has been heartening to hear of the ways in so many communities that commemorated the losses and sacrifice experienced during the pandemic. The Government will bring forward a programme of COVID-19 commemorative activity, and we will set out full details in response to the recommendations of the UK Commission on COVID commemoration. And can I thank Baroness Morgan of Coates and all the Commission members for their consideration in recommending how to mark this period, and for their ongoing engagement with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who will lead on the commemorative activity. The Department is working with a range of partners, including my own department, and regularly engages with the COVID-19 bereaved family groups. And I want to thank these groups for their ongoing support and commend them for the strength and resilience they show and the support they provide for other families in their grief. As part of the commemoration of the pandemic, the Government supported the COVID-19 Day of Reflection in March, more than 200 events, and I confirm that Day of Reflection will take place on Sunday the 8th of March, and I hope that members will support activities in their constituency. As we've heard, across the river from this House stands the COVID-19 Memorial Wall. I certainly remember the first time after we lost my father-in-law, Brian Davies, that we stopped at that memorial. It's a really moving and powerful tribute to the lives lost, with almost 250,000 hearts lovingly painted on the wall. And for families, it's really important to remember. So I agree with the member for North East Fife. It is a point to remember every day when we pass it. And I know that my colleagues from DCMS are working with Friends of the Wall on that long-standing commemoration, and will update the House in due course. Together we remember the courageous sacrifices of frontline workers across the country. We've heard about many of them today. Too many to mention, but those frontline workers, NHS staff workers, trains and bus drivers, the refuse collectors, supermarket and delivery staff, too many to mention. And I agree with my friend from Loughborough that many on the front line were the poorest and lowest pay, and they were disproportionately affected, and we must continue to make sure that that doesn't happen again. The pandemic demonstrated the remarkable work of civic society, the 12.4 million people that volunteered in some way, vaccine volunteers, befrienders, carers, as mentioned by my friend, the Honourable for Coatbridge and Bells Hill. I want to turn to the steps briefly on what we're doing to ensure that the United Kingdom is better prepared for a future pandemic, which does remain a top priority for this government. And my friend from Glasgow North made the crucial points about learning lessons, as did my friend from Bolton West on PPE. Later this year, we will conduct a national exercise to test our ability to respond to a pandemic, and this will involve all regions and nations of the United Kingdom with thousands of participants. The outcome of the exercises will inform how we approach the pandemic going forward. We've heard about long COVID, and if I had more time I would talk more about that, but the member from Hayes and Harlington made points about this, as did many others. Since 2020, the NHS in England has invested significantly in supporting people with long COVID, including specialist post-COVID services for adults and children and young people, and has continued to invest over 57 million into long COVID research, which will remain vitally important. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the member for West Ham and Beckton for securing this important debate. As we mark the 5th anniversary of the pandemic together, we will ensure that lessons are learnt, that the loss is honoured, and as a nation, we do not forget.
To wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in the few seconds I have, I just wanted to say I thought it was important that we had this debate so that the 5th anniversary went past without being missed. It is clear we have merely touched on the surface of what could be said, but thanks to the honourable colleagues across the House who have contributed, much has been said, and I think there's clearly much more to say. I would just like to put on the record my thanks to my constituents for all they've done, and I hope to all the families and all those affected watching outside, they feel this has been important in recognising the last 5 years and knowing that there is more to be said, and we will talk further about it.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And I thank all members, and especially the Minister, for being so swift at the dispatch box.
I'd like to move this House to now adjourn.
I just let the front benches shuffle over for the adjournment debate. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Sunder. The question do now... Oh, more colleagues are wandering around the chamber. I'm on my feet, gentlemen. You should be seated. The question is that this House do now...